Hello, my name's Oliver Robertson. I'm a researcher at the University of Otago in Wellington, New Zealand, and today I'm going to be presenting some of my research looking at residential mobility and changes in deprivation levels for 0 to 4-year-olds in New Zealand. I just want to acknowledge my co-authors, Kim Nathan, Philippa Howden-Chapman, Michael Baker, Polly Atatoaka, and Neville Pierce. The Statistics New Zealand disclaimer, basically saying that I'm using Stats New Zealand data, but the results are not official statistics and are my work. So today, we're going to be talking about my research that focuses on the movement patterns of children born in New Zealand from birth up until their 4th birthday. We look at the level of socioeconomic deprivation in the areas that the children move from and to. And we look at the transition patterns for both the whole population and those that identify as Maori or Pacifica. So this work builds on prior work we have done that looked at the stability of the early home environment for children. So in that case, we were including the number of moves as a regressor and seeing what impact it had on outcomes for children. And in this case, we really want to drill into those moves and look at, are children moving to areas with greater or lesser levels of socioeconomic deprivation. And we're focusing on the first 4 years of life based on both the importance of this period for healthy child development and the frequency with which young children move. For context, New Zealand is a highly mobile population with one of the most mobile populations of the OECD. For example, 39% of people resided at a different address in the 2013 census compared with the 2006 census. Previous literature has looked at movement patterns in New Zealand and abroad, but frequently uses survey or census data. So this misses high frequency moves. So for example, you're only going to observe addresses that occur that a child is living at when a particular survey or census is undertaken. And so you're going to miss moves that occur between different surveys. And it's also going to miss young children. So in our case, we're looking at 0 to 4-year-olds. And if you're using census data that is collected every 5 years, those children are going to be completely missing from it. And there are strong health and socioeconomic disparities between Maori and Pacifica and the wider population in New Zealand. So Maori and Pacifica move more frequently, are more likely to live in high deprivation areas, and have lower average income and employment rates. We use data from the Integrated Data Infrastructure. The IDI is an administrative data set that is a collection of government data that have been de-identified and linked at the individual level by Statistics New Zealand. So we're using a number of different data sets within this database. We're using address data. So the address data is sourced from 6 different government agencies, including the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Social Development. Basically, when an individual interacts with one of these agencies and their address has changed, the data within the IDI is updated to reflect this. And each address also includes a geospatial component. It lists what mesh block it is in, and mesh block is the smallest geospatial unit that Statistics New Zealand uses. For ethnicity data, it's basically they look at, we're using the source rank ethnicity, which looks at all the ethnicity data within the IDI and ranks it on the reliability of the source data and the time since that source was updated, and uses it to create a list of ethnicities an individual identifies as. So in this case, an individual can identify as multiple ethnicities. And we also use deprivation data. So we're using NZ-DEP 2013, a small area index of socioeconomic deprivation that was created using Census 2013 data. Basically, this gives each mesh block in New Zealand an NZ-DEP score. A score of 1 indicates that an area is in the 10% of least deprived areas, and a score of 10 is in the 10% of most deprived areas. Our cohort is all children born in New Zealand from 2004 up until 2018. And we're using data from birth up until their 4th birthday or December 2018. So this table below lists some of the demographic information on our sample. So we've got 3 columns: IDI movers, so that's children in our cohort that move house 1 or more times; the IDI non-movers, so children in our cohort that only have a single address; and then we also have children from the 2013 census as a cross-sectional comparison. So there's a few interesting things here. So for one, if we compare the 3 columns, we can see that Maori and Pacifica are overrepresented compared to the census in the movers column and underrepresented in the non-movers column. We can also see that for the moves per child, for the whole population, the average child is making 2.15 moves, but for the Maori it's 2.52 and Pacifica 2.24. So both Maori and Pacifica are moving more frequently than the whole population. If we include the non-moving population when calculating the number of moves, this still holds true. So this is our transition matrix. So the leftmost column is showing the origin deprivation level, and the top the top row of these 10 numbers here is showing the destination deprivation level, and the cells beneath this are showing the percentage of moves from a particular origin deprivation level to a particular destination deprivation level. So for example, if we look at this top left number, this 29, that's saying that 29% of the moves from deprivation level 1 are to a mesh block with a deprivation level of 1. Over on the right, we have 4 columns: move count, which is the total number of moves that are observed from a particular origin deprivation level; movers, so that's the number of unique movers from an origin deprivation level. So for example, you note that move count is higher than movers. That's one child can move multiple times within a particular level of deprivation. So move count counts each of their moves. Moves is how many people there are doing the moves. But a child can be counted multiple times in movers over different deprivation levels. So if a child moves from level 1 to level 2, they could show up in the movers count for both of those rows. Non-movers is showing the distribution of children that do not move over the different deprivation levels, and census population is again that cross-sectional comparison. So there's a number of interesting points here. In each case, this diagonal shows the percentage of moves that are from an origin level that is equal to the destination deprivation level. So basically the move results in no change in deprivation. And in each case, that is the most common occurrence. This is especially prominent when we look at depth level 10 and depth level 1. So from depth level 1, 29% of moves are to depth level 1, and it's even larger with depth level 10. So where 47% of moves are to another deprivation level 10 mesh block. So once a child is living in an NZ depth 10 area, it's quite likely that if they move, they're going to move to another NZ depth 10 area. It's also interesting to note that the move count and movers both strictly increase with the origin deprivation level. So as we look at more and more deprived areas, there are both more unique children living in those areas, and there are more moves happening. As a comparison, we can look at the non-mover deprivation distribution of deprivations, where it's not strictly equal, but it's basically it's pretty evenly distributed. We have slightly more in the most deprived areas, but generally it's pretty evenly distributed. So it looks like there is a systematic difference in that children that move live in more deprived areas than the non-moving population. And this is reflected that if we look at the census population, which includes movers and non-movers, we can see that we see the same pattern as we saw in the movers, that the number of children increases as the deprivation level increases. Moving to the Maori population, there's a few interesting differences. So for one, again, for most of the deprivation levels, the most common outcome is that you're going to move to a mesh block that has the same level of deprivation as your origin. But if we look at deprivation levels 7, 8, and 9, their most common outcome is actually that they will move to a deprivation 10 area. Also, the number of children for moves from NZ depth level 1 to NZ depth level 1, then the percentage is smaller. So children moving from NZ depth level 1, Maori children moving from NZ depth level 1 are more likely to move to more deprived areas than the overall population. And for moves from NZ depth 10, 50% of them to another NZ depth 10 area. So once they're in those very deprived areas, they're more likely to stay there. We see the same pattern in that move count and movers strictly increases with the level of deprivation, but the number of non-movers actually also increases with the level of deprivation. So we don't have an even distribution here. We're actually seeing that for both movers and non-movers that identify as Maori, they're more likely to live in very deprived areas. Also, if we compare the move count and movers for the Maori population versus the overall population, we can see that Maori moves are overrepresented in NZ level 10. So Maori made up 33.5% of the population, but they actually make up 60% of the moves from NZ level 10. So they're overrepresented. Now looking at the Pacifica population, we can see some patterns that are similar to the Maori population, but they're even more likely to move to very deprived areas. So for NZ depth, origin deprivation levels of 2 through 9, the most common outcome is actually that they will move to an NZ depth 10 area. Only NZ depth 1 has an outcome which is they're most likely to move to another NZ depth 1 area. So for the Pacifica population, they're much more likely to move into high levels of deprivation. Once they're in higher levels of deprivation, they're more likely to stay there. So 54% have moved from interdebt 10 to another interdebt 10 area. So that's higher than both the overall population and the Maori population. We see the same pattern in that move count and movers and non-movers all increase with the level of deprivation. So the non-movers increasing is similar to the Maori population and different from the overall population. And we also see that looking at their move count or movers, that they are overrepresented when you consider their fraction of the population versus the number of total moves that they contribute. So going through our results, the most common outcome of a move is no change in deprivation for the overall population. And this is especially pronounced in the most deprived areas. So we had 47% of moves from interdebt 10 areas were to other interdebt 10 areas. And the number of moves and movers increases with the level of deprivation. And we also saw that distinct difference in the distribution of non-movers versus both the moving population and the census population. The results for the Maori and Pacifica. Maori and Pacifica make up a disproportionately high fraction of the moves associated with very deprived areas and a disproportionately low fraction of moves associated with areas with low levels of deprivation. We saw the same increase in moves and movers as deprivation increased as in the whole population. However, the number of non-movers also increases with deprivation, so that non-movers were also more likely to live in more deprived areas. Maori and Pacifica children living in interdebt 1 areas move more frequently than the overall population. So they had 0.83 and 0.84 moves per child versus 0.69 moves per child for compared to the whole population. And in interdebt 10 areas, Maori move more frequently, so 1.42 versus 1.25 moves per child, but Pacifica actually move less frequently, 1.2 moves per child. So the overrepresentation in total moves for Pacifica children is actually driven by the number of children living in those most deprived areas and not just them moving very frequently. There are a couple of limitations of my data that I want to mention. So we use administrative data, and the address data is recorded each time an individual interacts with a government agency. So if individuals don't interact with government agencies, we could miss particular addresses they're living at. The deprivation index we're using is based on 2013 census data, and so the level of deprivation might have changed in a particular mesh block, since we're using data that goes back to 2004 and forward to 2018. But we thought it was better to use a consistent measure of deprivation and apply it equally, and it sits sort of relatively towards the middle of our data. And we also look only at children born in New Zealand. So in this case, we're excluding the experiences of, children with New Zealand-born parents who move back to New Zealand but are born overseas, or refugees or migrants who all might have, provide interesting information. Well, thank you very much for watching my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.